Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 149, I chat with movie and TV consultant Ron Williams about the state of the movie and TV industry from the professional's perspective. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded February 25th, 2013. Episode 149, What the Pros Know. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies on your PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or TV instantly. All streamed directly to you, saving you time, money, and hassle. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. And by Man Packs, manly goods on a schedule. Get started today and have underwear, socks, toiletries, shaving supplies, and more delivered to your door. Visit manpacks.com/twit and get $10 off your first order of $30 or more, or buy a $50 gift card for $40. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek. This week, my guest geek is Ron Williams, a consultant to the movie and TV industry who has just returned from the Hollywood Post Alliance conference and is going to give us the view from the professional angle on what's happening in movies and TVs today. Hey, Ron, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Scott. It's good to be back again.
Yes, it's your third time, I think, and always happy to have you here.
I believe that's correct. Yeah, that's good.
Good deal. Well, listen, we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff, and I'm sure that the chat room will have some questions. So if you're watching live at live.twit.tv or in the chat room at irc.twit.tv, you can post questions, and I'll pass along as many as I can. So, Ron, before we get to Hollywood Post Alliance, I just want to ask you real quick, did you watch the Oscars last night?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You know, that's our proof of the pudding, shall we say, here in Hollywood.
Indeed. Yeah, yeah. And what'd you think overall? Were you relatively pleased with the winners and so on?
Yes, actually, it came out just as I thought I would like to see it come out. I've always been a big fan of Life of Pi. It's actually an extraordinary story, and an
extraordinary looking movie.
Oh, yes, yes. Yeah. He did a phenomenal job, the effects and the creativity. We did see it several times in different formats, and it was always going back to the 3D that had a greater impact than the 2D did. And that's to me what made the movie, is the way he handled the 3D.
Right, which was done from the beginning, right? It wasn't a post-production thing that he actually shot in 3D?
Oh, it was an original 3D production, yes. So it's one of those that really immerses you into the story. 2D to me is in a story like that. And I usually don't see emotional movies in the theater, but Pi being such an effects movie, and then the 3D on top of it, it was extraordinary. I mean, after the credits went by, as we usually sit and watch the credits.
I do too, yeah.
Friends, we just looked at each other and went, what the hell did we just see? I mean, oh my God. And that is the impact that a movie in the theater, to me, should have on the audience.
Yep. Did you see it in a theater with Dolby Atmos?
No, I didn't. It was just 5.1 surround. The Atmos, which I hope we'll get to talk about in a minute, added so much to it that my colleagues at Dolby said that it was very, very additive to the emotion of the story as well as the 3D. In fact, the comment was made is you could not have been short of being there in Ang Lee's mind with the Atmos and the 3D and what he produced. So it was quite interesting. The awards, Argo getting the Best Picture, It was a tough one for me. There were about 3 or 4 that I would have been happy with.
Yeah, I thought the field in general, in many of the categories, was very even, perhaps more so than in previous years. A lot of perfectly worthy candidates, nominees. So, you know, one can't dispute that Argo got the award. I kind of thought it might go to Lincoln.
Well, I think that was the emotional favorite because of Spielberg and the Sally Fields and the people. That, to me, it was the emotional favorite. But as far as going down to see what the Academy was going to do, you know, I deal with the Academy all the time, and they're pretty astute on what really is the essence of what was going on. Of course, except for the director.
Yes.
Yeah, that one got everyone befuddled, but nonetheless, that's the way it went down. So the actors and actresses, I think, were appropriate. They got the awards for the performances that they did. I think they were all very good. There was nothing, I think, upsetting or question mark with any of them, because I think most of them all were quite worthy. So
yeah,
as you say, I agree. It was an even playing field this year.
Yeah.
What did you think of Mr. MacFarlane?
Well, I can't say I like his humor. I think it's a generational thing, and certainly the younger folks probably appreciate it. I don't like much of what he does on TV. Family Guy, Ted. It all just seems that's a movie, of course. It seems very crude to me, somewhat hostile in its undertone, that I just don't like. I don't enjoy it at all. Now, he's a very personable guy. The camera loves him. And he sings talented. Great.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. I mean, the one thing I found that I really loved about the show last night was all the live music that was being performed.
Was it the Academy Awards or was it the Tonys? I got confused there for a while.
Yeah, well, you know, that might have been somewhat confusing. I've never seen that much live music on the Oscars before.
No,
and I thought that was great.
Well, it is definitely showcasing the talent of the performers, but
yeah, even the actors who came out and did song and dance, like Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and who was the other guy that they did a 3-man show, you know, soft shoe.
The gentleman that was in The Hobbit.
Right.
Yeah,
right, exactly. And you know, they did a credible job. It was great. I did not like the whole opening bit about, you know, Kirk coming back from the future and saying, you know, oh, you got to avoid these horrible things, and then they show these horrible things, and I'm just going, come on. It was way too long and not funny, in my opinion.
No, I agree. The people that I've talked to with this morning, they said the same as you, and I agree. That opening montage was not good at all. It wasn't to the point. As far as MacFarlane's humor, in my opinion, it's sophomoric.
Exactly.
But the type of humor with the intellect that had to go with it didn't fit, because you had to think about what he was saying, even though it was cheap shots. But nonetheless.
Yeah. But there was something. Yeah, okay. I can dig that. Beatmaster in the chat room is saying, don't blame it on us younglings. He was bland and stiffer than usual. I didn't find him stiff. In fact, I found him very smooth, but he kept doing these little digs, which seems to be kind of the way of it these days. And Steve C in the chat room says, Daniel Day-Lewis was funnier than Seth MacFarlane. And I did really enjoy Daniel Day-Lewis's acceptance speech.
Oh, yes. He was very good with that. And he it wouldn't have worked without the presenter.
Right. Right, exactly. Well, anyway, just wanted to touch base on that a little bit because it was last night, and I always watch it. I watched it a little bit delayed on DVR so that I could skip through the commercials and some of the more boring speeches. Oh, sorry. Oh, I can't. Yeah, right. No, I watched every commercial. I didn't steal anything. Please don't take my DVR away.
And we could talk about that little controversy. That was a topic at the HPA with the government lawyers, Jim Berger.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, there's a lot going on there with that.
Okay,
So
well, then that's one point of conversation that we can have here during the show. But before we do any of the more specific things, I would like you to explain to everybody what the HPA, Hollywood Post Alliance, is, and why they get together every year to talk tech.
Well, the Hollywood Post Alliance is a trade association here in the professional community that covers motion pictures, televisions, commercials, any digital media, and any form of data moving. That's a pretty broad stroke, but over the years, the post-production community in Hollywood have gotten together because they found that manufacturers would get certain hardware out and one would know before the other, and the competition was getting really crazy. And it was, well, we need to get together and talk about all the problems that we have. And that's how it started. It was basically engineering problems for the tech retreat. And then that grew into newer technology, and it grew into an international conference now where all those disciplines I mentioned come together, throw ideas out. It's a Q&A through the whole week, and they actually have these breakfast roundtables, and you get to talk to the speakers and the companies that have these ideas over breakfast in a round table. And it's really personable situation, and you can get specific answers. Now, most of everyone at this retreat are managers. They're the people who are going to sign the checks. So they want to know where the technology is moving. What should I look for? What are my people going to do? What equipment am I buying that's going to be obsolete in 2 years, or what's going to be the progression of things? So it's an incredible gathering. There isn't anything like that anywhere that anybody knows of, and that's why it has now become international. So we pull people. There were people from Australia, people there from New Zealand, from Park Road, to talk about The Hobbit and what they did with that in making it. There were Australia, Europe, a lot of input from around the world into what it takes to make television and movies these days. And one of the big topics was, where are the eyeballs? Where are we going with this whole thing? I mean,
do you mean in terms of commercial cinema attendance, or TV eyeballs, or both? Everything. Because what we wanted to know, and actually the ETC, Entertainment Technology Committee group that's down at USC, they actually brought film students in, and we had a panel, and they talked about what the millennials are looking for and where their thoughts are and how they feel about frame rate and watching a movie on a cell phone as opposed to go to a theater or second screen. We had people out of England, as 139 company. I got notes everywhere here. They did a 6-year study, putting cameras in homes and just watching how people do entertainment. So that was a big thrust in understanding what the consumers now are looking at, how they're looking at it, why they're looking at it, and where their benchmarks are, which was very interesting. Yeah, what kind of conclusions did they report?
Well, nothing we wanted to hear.
Okay.
One of the big shockers that created a big murmur in the room of about 600 managers and engineers is that most of the millennials on the panel didn't see anything wrong with texting in a movie theater.
Whoa.
What's the point? So the question was asked, well, what are you texting about? Well, a couple of the young ladies that were there said, well, I'm texting about the movie. She says, but that's a little bit of a problem because while I'm texting, I miss the movie. But I'll be able to see it again.
Oh, man, that's the whole problem with multitasking that young people today claim they can be texting, watching TV, studying, doing 3 or 4 things at once. I say, no, that's not possible. You're only skimming the surface of each of those activities, and you're missing a lot.
Just as a side note, I saw a show on Discovery Channel about that, paying attention and what the absorption of information is versus the multitasking. And it is what we assume it would be. The more you divide, the less you comprehend.
Right.
And that we all know that, but yet, again, they continue to do that.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting fact that the ETC brought up on where the eyes are. The lady from England with the 139 project. Let's see, that to give her proper credit, it's the actual customer behavioral study that they did in England. And
this was where they put in cameras in people's homes and just watched them all the time?
They gave them sets, large 65-inch sets that has the camera built into it for Skype. And then they put a camera in the back of the room to record. They recorded both. And they just let it go. And it's interesting to see when they're watching game shows, they will be texting to someone, watching an episodic, they will go online to find out information about what was said on the show. But very rarely were they just sitting there concentrating on watching the programming.
Which corroborates what the other people were saying about sitting there texting during a movie. Exactly. Yeah, it was interesting. Some of the other things that were along those lines is the question was asked: what's your threshold for the quality on what device? Does it that's a good question.
You? Do you find it more objectionable to watch a movie on a smartphone as opposed to a tablet, as opposed to a small screen TV, as opposed to a large screen TV? And most of them said it doesn't make any difference. They're interested in the story. Now, one gentleman said, if I'm on my cell phone, on my smartphone, and it's coming in at 10 frames a second, I really don't care because I'm more interested in the story.
Yeah, but 10 frames a second is so jittery, and it's like it would take me so out of the story. I'd be focused on this horrible-looking image.
Well, I guess that's why we're technical and not an artist. Because these were film students. They're film students.
They're film students, and they're saying they don't care what it looks like.
Exactly. And the other interesting point of all of them that were on the stage, only one of them had a TV.
The rest of them didn't even own a TV.
Nope, didn't own a TV. They're watching on their notebooks, their cell phones. There was a gentleman out of USC who lives in a house with 7 others, and he said, we have a projector that we use to see our work from school. But he said, we never watch television on it. Everybody's watching television on their iPads or on their notebooks. And obviously it's not conventional television as over the air. It's Hulu and the other over-the-top providers.
Right. Well, and so in other words, the HPA technical people and managers need to know this in order to change or tweak what they do to address the fact that more and more people are, in fact, not watching on big screens or traditional TVs, but more on mobile devices.
Well, yeah, there's a phrase, second screen, that's used. And the second screen is what's becoming predominant in the home at this point. And so with that going on, what do you do to the content? There was a discussion with some screenwriters and episodic writers. Now, how do you write for small screen? And it was an odd question, but
is it even different than writing for a big screen?
It is much different, and they said it is much different. And the other issue that this segment of the population, they have different names for them, but the younger, is and I can't say that because I do it, is marathon or binge watching.
Huh.
Record 8 or 10 shows on your DVR and just play them back, fast forward through the commercials. And it's like a mini movie because you're watching 4 weeks of this episodic. Now, the writers said that they write now for that, knowing that the binge viewing is taking place. So they don't drop the cookies or the Easter eggs, so to speak, in the scripts because they know that they're going to be watching them back to back. So there isn't that week's delay to understand where the story's going.
Right.
Of course, it was mentioned that it's distracting from the social interaction that we grew up with, the Monday morning water cooler.
Right.
You don't discuss an episode at work.
It just aired, yeah.
Nobody watches it.
In real time.
In real time. So that the social interaction in a social place about a discussion of say, Justified or the Americas doesn't happen anymore. So that's a loss there, and the writers took that into account. But that was an interesting discussion as well.
Oh, no kidding. Bramster in the chat room is asking, what are Easter eggs in this context? You mentioned that.
Well, that's a little hidden piece of information that's put into the script that, if you watch an episode maybe twice or 3 times, you'll go, oh, that's how that got there, because they let us drop that little Easter egg hunt in there, and now it bores us out why it was dropped in, because it didn't make any sense. I find that very obvious with like Doctor Who. They do that with Justified. They'll drop these little bits of information that don't make any sense in that episode, but 2 episodes down, it makes a lot of sense.
Got it. Well, I have to admit, I am also like you. I do the same thing. I archive several episodes and watch them all at once. So it's not just the millennials.
Oh yeah, it's I find it, as they had described, it's watching a mini movie at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And,
well, I wanted to ask you about. You said that there were some folks from New Zealand talking about The Hobbit, and I would love to get the professional community's take on how well high frame rate did, and what were the challenges and insights gained from doing that experiment, and are we going to see more of it in the future?
Well, the Park Road is a production company that Peter Jackson formed outside of Weta, which is the one that he did with Lord of the Rings.
That's Weta is Warner. Is that right?
Well, it's Warner Jackson.
Right. But I mean, it's associated with Warner Brothers as opposed to Universal or somebody else. Yeah. Okay. But now he's formed his own production company.
Yeah. And they, I hesitate because there's Jim Cameron and Peter Jackson have got this thing about 3D and high frame rate. I must say, though, that every time the conversation at the whole conference came around to 3D and someone suggested that 3D's dying and it's dead, the room broke out into applause.
Meaning that the assembled people there were happy that it was dying or dead?
Yes, yes.
No one there likes 3D?
No.
Why not?
No. Well, it's varied from, the bandwidth it takes, the how big the files are to move around in post-production, the going back and re-editing and finding out and having to have a videographer there to do the depth. And it just adds so much to the cost and the confusion, so to speak, in a post house when you're doing a film in 3D. And then it really doesn't go much of anywhere. Now, Disney, on the other hand, with all of the animation for kids, that's goldmine. They love that.
Right.
Myself, I'm not a fan of 3D for anything other than a large blockbuster movie. And I think that will always be Now, that's my opinion, that
Mhm.
that's the box that it's going to stay in.
Well, what about Life of Pi? You mentioned that earlier, how great the 3D was on that. I wouldn't exactly call that a blockbuster.
Oh, come on.
I mean, it's a fabulous movie. Don't get me wrong. It's probably my favorite movie of the year. But it's not, I mean, a blockbuster to me is, you know, Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or Star Wars or, you know, some big giant adventure, which Pi was an adventure, certainly, but a more subtle one.
But I think that the use of 3D for the story is what I think is critical. Doing some of the others, like Transformers and those types of movies, I don't think the 3D is as compelling as it would be for, like, Life of Pi. So I think there's always going to be a place for the 3D. I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's going to stay because there is a place for 3D in the storytelling. And that's the most important thing, is the storytelling.
Sure.
Now, when it comes back to the home, one of the issues is how the consumer is reacting to 3D in this day and age. And it isn't going so well. So we know most of the television manufacturers, 3D is just part of the set at no extra cost.
Right.
So that cost differential is now gone. The glasses war is still somewhat there, but we think that the passive is going to stay. So your Blu-rays for the download of, or the playing of 3D is where you're at in the home as a casual viewing. And that's not going very well either. So there's a lot of things with 3D in the consumer that I don't think that is going to go on in any great form that the industry thought it was. But then again, we had a large discussion of, well, okay, let's just say, generally speaking, 3D has failed. Okay, what's next? Well, we're moving into the Ultra HD. And as you and I both know, at CES, that was all the rage. Everybody had 3840 by 2160 displays of all various sizes, from 50-inch to 110-inch.
Yep.
And that's, we had large discussions about that and where that's going to go and whether or not the consumer is going to go for it. A mutual friend of ours, Pete Putnam, did a talk on, why nobody's really buying new TVs. Well, the 3D set confused them. The glasses confused them. How are we going to get it here is confusing to them. And it's like, okay, it's not going well, so let's give them Ultra HD, and they're going to love that. Well, I think most people at this point, even with the economy, they're gun shy about buying another technology. So we got high def. It's nice. It looks, the football games look great. Episodic television looks really nice. So why do I need to buy another television? So I think that's a hurdle that the industry has got to take on. And then we're going on to 8K.
And a lot of people that I talk to and send me emails say, why get 4K? Why not just wait for 8K? That's coming down the pike.
Well, that's not a bad attitude, because quite frankly, Japan NHK, who is the national broadcaster in Japan, who is funding most of everything, because in Japan they have this horrendous tax when you buy a television, and that's what funds the R&D and the networks in Japan, is that tax. Kind of similar to countries in Europe do something similar. But NHK has had this broad project to do advanced television. Well, they had actual 4K 4096 by 2160, and they've been demonstrating that, saying that's coming and that's coming. And then when the display manufacturers realized that they can't do 4096 economically on a display, a consumer television, what they did is they went to 3840 by 2160, and the second term for that is Quad HD. So it's easy to shoot down 4 HD streams to a display to make 3840 by 2160.
Right.
So now with NHK saying that, they just a few weeks ago announced that what they're going to do is they're going to start broadcasting in the 6 megahertz channel bandwidth, similar to what our channels are, Ultra HD by the mid 2014. So they're going to be broadcasting it.
Wow, using probably what, H.265 compression?
I would assume that that's what they're going to use, is the 6.5, which is the high efficiency video coding.
Right, HEVC is also known as.
Right. So that's moving along. On that, I suppose we can move on to one of my issues of the 8K coverage of the Olympics.
Yes, indeed. In fact, I would love very much to talk about that. That is on my list. But if you'll hold on just a moment, I want to take just a moment to thank one of our sponsors for this episode, which is Netflix. Now, I'm sure at the HPA there must have been a lot of talk, and we've talked some about it here, about streaming as opposed to broadcast or physical media. And Netflix, of course, is at the forefront of the streaming revolution. They have thousands of TV episodes and movies that you can stream directly to just about any consumer electronics device you have, be it a TV, Blu-ray player, your tablet or your phone very often, your computer, of course, gaming consoles, dedicated boxes like Roku and Boxy. Just about anything these days has a Netflix app, and it lets you stream as much as you want for one low monthly fee. You can even start on one device and finish on another, so it really is the ultimate in convenience. For those few of you who have not yet tried Netflix, and I know most of you have, but for those who haven't, you're free to give it a try out for 30 days for free. Just go to netflix.com/twit and sign up for that 30-day free trial of Netflix streaming. That's netflix.com/twit. And we thank Netflix very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks and the entire Twit network. So, Ron, you were just about to tell us about the 8K coverage of the Olympics, which NHK did. And I believe they showed it on some gigantic screens, both in London and possibly in Japan as well.
Yes, they're 85-inch LCD displays by Sharp. They commissioned Sharp to build this for their project. Sharp has turned it into a product. So the 8K by 4K display is pretty dominant everywhere. They took us through, trying to think of the gentleman's name. I'll find it, but I probably won't be able to pronounce it. My apologies to him. From NHK, who did the presentation. And he took us through the fact that they only had 4 cameras total, and they had to continually move them all of the time. And the broadcast center where they brought the signals in was a small warehouse full of electronics. Bringing it in, processing the signal, getting it ready to be transmitted. It had to be switched, color corrected, and then sent out. So it was on a delay. But it was interesting in what it took to do it, and they really put a lot of effort into it. And we obviously didn't see the actual 8K images, but we did see 4K images, and they were quite extraordinary. They really were. But then again, it lends itself to why. Right. Well, then we can go on to take a full circle back to the 4K. Sony Pictures, who I've been working closely with over the years, has a camera, not Sony Pictures, but Sony Electronics has a f/65 4K camera. Right. And it's a true 4096. And they've been doing features. The camera, we thought, that's primarily its usage is in producing movies. Well, the television has caught on to it, and 2 networks in South America are buying f/65 cameras to shoot soap operas.
Soap operas in 4K?
Okay, now.
Oh, man.
Here's their thought process. Well, when you take a slice of 1920 by 1080 out of the 3840, or actually 4096 2160, you get a really high, good quality HD picture.
This is true. If you shoot at higher resolution and then down res it, you're going to get a better result than if you simply shoot at the resolution that you're going to end up in.
Right. So the other aspect that none of us really thought about that they came up with, they do a lot of green screen keying in these soap operas. So instead of sending out a whole crew of maybe 16 people to go shoot the back plate, which replaces the green in the picture, three guys go out and they just shoot a wide shot. Then they come back with it, and when they go into post-production, they just do a pan and scan. Oh, I want this part of the picture, or, oh, gee, I want this part. And they don't have to actually frame and a director be there. This is what we want. So this, cut the mountains at this point and the trees over here and this. They just bring it in and say, just shoot it. And I think we've all done that with our digital cameras. You know, you just stick your arm in the air and take a picture of a crowd and then bring it back, put it in Photoshop and say, oh, okay, this is what I want right here.
Right.
Well, that's kind of sort of what they're doing in post-production now with shooting in the 4K realm. So it saves them a lot of money in post-production. They get a really high-quality HD picture out of it. And then they also have a 4K archive. So when 4K becomes, a broadcasting standard, they've already got a library. So it's not so crazy to do, high def with a 4K camera.
Mm-hmm. I think I saw on the HPA agenda that Sony Pictures has initiated production of 4 new TV shows in 4K using the F65 as well. Are these the ones you're talking about?
No. These are in addition to Phil Squires, who's the vice president of post-production over there for television, gave a great outline of what they're doing for these particular shows. And he's got 4 going in, and he's got 2 more that they're working up numbers on. So that would be 6 shows that they're going to shoot with the F65 in 4K. Now, considering that some of these episodic shows that go on forever, like Law, I mean, that thing's been on forever, they've got something in the can that's going to be viable in the future. So
right.
A lot of the syndicators are looking at their future income with having a high standard in the can.
Mm-hmm. Undermined in the chat room is saying Red is suing Sony over the raw encode process on the F65, but isn't suing Ari. Going to be a big mess. They want an injunction, blah, blah, blah. Did anybody talk about any of these legal issues?
Oh, yes. That was Mr. Berger, Jim Berger he's a lawyer in Washington that handles all kinds of lawsuits that our industry has, whether it be dealing with the FCC and stations or patents and things like that. The thrust of what your input is that Red has decided that they are going to take on the deep pockets of Sony. Sony's broke, but that's okay.
Their pockets are still deep anyway.
Yeah. Their suit is saying that if you do a higher frame rate over 4K, 3840, they have a patent on that. And in fact, they do.
Sony does?
No, Red does.
Oh, Red does. Okay.
So they just picked out Sony because Sony is, as I say, deep pockets, and they've got the F65, which is 4096, which breaks that barrier, and it will do up to 120 frames. So it's got a high frame rate camera as well.
Right.
And Mr. Berger and a few other people at the round table, we were talking about that. And the question is, why were they ever granted that patent to begin with? That's like patent. It's patenting or putting a patent on oxygen.
Right.
Come on, it's everywhere. Everybody does it. So you just can't walk in and patent something.
Patent a frame rate and a resolution combined together? I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
Not
It
any
should,
sense whatsoever.
yeah, it shouldn't have any legal standing at all. We'll have to ask This Week in Law about that. I'll check into that. But how can it possibly be?
Well, that's what we're all kind of wondering. But, you know, they got the patent. The patent was granted to them. So, you know, now the litigation begins.
Yeah.
So let's see. Oh, we had mentioned earlier the legal things. The other legal big battle that's going on is between the couple television stations, network, and Dish with their hopper.
Oh, yeah. What happened there at the show, at this conference? What was the scuttlebutt there?
There, it's that's another quite unusual situation. That's going
just to make sure
everybody
understands. The Dish Network satellite service has their DVR called the Hopper, which now has a commercial skipping feature, which previous DVRs used to have, and the movie and TV industry, I think, more or less successfully got them to get rid of it. But here it is back again, perhaps in a different form or different implementation or something. And the TV and movie industry is back up in arms about it because, of course, they don't want you skipping the commercials.
And in the listening to both sides of what we got at the conference, the hopper, when Dish started, was, well, you've got 4 boxes in 4 different rooms, and you could hop from room to room to room to watch your show. The show would follow you.
Right.
Well, when they instituted these flags from one of the companies that Dish bought, it was really easy for them to just say, okay, when you see this flag, go fast until you hit the next flag. And, of course, Nielsen and a few other agencies are very happy to put those flags in there because that's where they get their data from. So they now flipped it over, not hopping from room to room. You're now hopping over commercials. And at the presentation at CES, they were very careful not to say the words that I just said. They were still going with the idea that it was room to room. But that's another big litigation that's going on right now, and that's gonna affect the consumers and how they get their delivery.
We
And,
just talked. I didn't want to. I want to make sure we get to high frame rate because I mentioned that earlier, and then we sort of got off on 4K. And there's something else about 4K I want to ask you too. But before we do, let's. What was the news on high frame rate?
High frame rate, 48 seems to stay is where it's going to level off.
Do we know whether Cameron's doing Avatar 2 in 48 or 60?
He's going to do it 60 stereo.
Right, 3D.
Right.
But at 60 hertz, 60 frames rather than even 48. So the effect of enhanced clarity and so on should be even greater than it was in The Hobbit.
Yes. There was a lot of discussion about that. The guys from Park Road were really pretty good about that. And let me quickly. They said that they did a lot of testing, and that 48 is at the point where they felt that the loss of the horizontal artifacts is the reason you want to go to a high frame rate. If you're at 24 and the camera does a pan, you know, as my fingers are doing, it judders across.
Right.
Well, the higher the frame rate, the less judder that there is, so that there's more clarity. But as you go up higher in frame rate, the temporal perception it becomes more real.
This is what a lot of people complained about in The Hobbit, was it looked, quote unquote, too real.
Well, Mr. Cameron has done a test film where he shot the same scene. He built a stage, spent a lot of money doing this. And he did these tests, panning tests and sword fights and all kinds of things at 24 all the way up to 120.
Yep.
And it was set in a medieval scene, big round table, feast, etc. And they pan across and the chairs.
Knights in chainmail, that sort of thing.
Yes. In a conversation I had with him when I looked at it, and I said, you know, it looks real. And he said, yeah, that's the point. It looks real. I said, but wait a minute. We know 24 frames to be fantasy because it doesn't look real.
Mm-hmm.
Car chase on the news is real. It's live. And everybody kind of knows the difference between being live and being fantasy. So the more you make fantasy real, to me anyways, and my comment to him is seeing two knights fighting swords and the sword blade moving, but there was no judder in it, and it was clean, it looked real. That happened centuries ago. That's not real. That's fantasy. And to me, that should stay in the realm of fantasy. And as you pointed out, what Peter Jackson did with The Hobbit, he went to 48 to get rid of the visual artifacts, but it was still fantasy.
Hmm. And did you see The Hobbit in high frame rate?
Yes.
And
yes.
Did it appear to be too real to you for the fact that it was supposed to be fantasy?
No, I didn't, because the computer generated images, the CGI, was crystal clear and sharp. And
which I thought was great.
Right, exactly. And I agree. And you didn't have to put a filter in and to lower the resolution of those graphics, because the practicals that
we just got a freeze there.
Camera.
I'm sorry, Ron. You froze there for a second. Would you just repeat your last sentence?
The CGI was really real, and instead of putting in a filter to fog the CGI to match the practical camera,
yep,
the camera at 48 was so sharp that it matched the computer graphics. So it blended very well, and it lent itself to a flow of the story. And I think that the 48 frames 3D for the Hobbit worked very well.
You just addressed a question in the chat room. Web 3122 asks, if 48 FPS looks too real, why not put in a filter? Well, you just answered that question. They didn't, because they wanted the CGI to match with reality, and they, instead of putting in a filter, they upped the frame rate of the live shots in order to match them more closely.
Right. And there are some productions that are done in a frame rate where they put in a filter to roll it off, and they actually put in there's a piece of software that adds film grain. So, you know, they want film at 48 frames.
Right.
Because that idea of a fantasy is too compelling.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Avatar 2, which is obviously also fantasy. And Cameron is shooting it even faster at 60. And somebody in the chat room asked 60 per eye, and the answer is yes. In the case of The Hobbit, it was 48 per eye. So it should be very interesting to see what Avatar 2 looks like and how the high frame rate affects that.
I drifted you away from your question about the 8K from NHK in the Olympics. The Olympics, oddly enough, was done, and it's growing. It was done in conventional television. It was done in, that's 2D. It was done in 3D. It was done in 4K, and it was done in 8K. So the London Olympics has the notoriety of being covered in more formats than anything ever covered before.
That's pretty amazing. I watched a fair amount of it in 3D. You know, I got DirecTV and N3D, I think was or I forget which channel it was that was showing it. And, you know, I liked it. I liked a lot of it in 3D. I didn't see the high resolution, but you know, I thought the 3D looked good.
I saw pieces of 3D, and I agree with you in that particular venue. As I had said earlier, my box for 3D was, you know, specific movies. But I think the only thing that's going to sustain 3D to the consumer is sports. I mean, if you've ever seen golf in 3D, it's amazing. Oh, no, I haven't. It's amazing. I mean, that's like being on the course. And that's one of those where you see a ball come up out of the bunker, and it just rolls over onto the green. But when you see it in 3D, it's truly standing there. You know, you could see the depth of what the shot was and how far it was and how good of a shot that the guy actually made, because now you can really gauge the distance that he hit the ball. So no, sports is a good thing for 3D as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we continue, and there is one other question I want to ask you about 4K, I do want to take another moment to welcome a new sponsor to the show. I'm very happy to do so. It's called Man Packs. Now, as a guy, and most of us watching this show are guys, I would be willing to wager, there's always the basic stuff, you know, that you always forget to buy until it's too late. And finding good products can take time. And stuff like underwear and socks, shaving stuff, things like that. Not that I use shaving stuff, but I certainly do use underwear and socks. You need to get these things, and you need to have them every day, but spending the time shopping for them is kind of a pain, if you ask me and most guys. So you don't have to do that anymore. The solution is Man Packs. And all you have to do is join the thousands of men who've already signed up, and you can order underwear, socks, shaving equipment, other stuff right there online, and they'll send it right to you. It's easy to manage your account, and they remind you before shipment, so there are no surprises. You can update each pack when you need something, or just wait for it to come to you every 3 months. There's free shipping, free returns, easy account management. It's really quite amazing. As the founder of the company says, we put customers first because we want customers for life. And so far as I've seen, and I've only just started looking at this service, they are serious about it. So here's an offer for Twit listeners. There are 2 exclusive offers, in fact, for Twit listeners. Visit manpacks.com. That's manpacks.com/twit, and get $10 off your first order of $30 or more, or buy a $50 gift card for $40. That's manpacks.com/twit, and get started today. And we thank Manpacks very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. Okay, Ron, we were talking some about 4K here, and the fact that we saw it at CES. We had all these TVs and displays that were showing 4K. What about 4K content delivery? This, to me, seems like the real fly in the ointment, if you will. Perhaps we have the same situation as we did before with when HD first came out. You know, HD TVs came out. There wasn't much content. That had to sort of slowly ramp up. Same with 3D, although that's got a different set of issues. What was talked about at the conference about the delivery of 4K, native 4K content?
Well, we know that there won't be any native delivery because the file structure is just way too big. I mean, even with the higher, more efficient codecs and compression. Well, you said native. To me, that's just uncompressed.
Okay, no. I don't. When I say native, I don't mean uncompressed. I mean acquired, created in 4K, kept in 4K throughout the post-production process, and delivered to you with 4K resolution. Now, obviously, that's going to be compressed.
Oh yes. Yeah.
But and assuming that we're talking about, what I'm talking about is 4K content as opposed to 1080p that then gets upscaled to 4K.
There was that last bit. Let me go on to that. There was a gentleman, Jeb Dean, whose company is poised to do HD to 4K up conversion.
Okay.
And he gave a paper on all of the pitfalls in doing that and how they have figured out how to do that to make the HD look very good in a 3840 by 2160. And with his demonstrations, I think they've touched on to a process that works very well. So, okay, with that, and he's not going to be the only one, we know that. So we have all these libraries of HD that we now can be poised to be upconverted.
Right.
Some of the sets they claim have up converters, but they can't be very good. They never are. You know, it puts a picture, but you and I would go crazy trying to watch a show with that type of a conversion.
Right.
But
still in all, at the beginning anyway, the vast majority of what people are going to be watching on these 4K TVs that they might be buying is going to be upconverted 1080p, either by the TV or the AV receiver. Onkyo now has 4K upconversion and Integra, I think, in their AV receivers, and probably some others as well. And perhaps by the content providers themselves, as you're talking about. So, somebody has a 1080p library and they say, well, we'll just reissue that in 4K and upconvert it, and off we go.
Right. And I think that's going to happen. The major issue with that is now the transport.
Right.
We have HDMI 1.4b that was supposedly able to capable of handling 4K, as they originally stated, which was 4096, but we know that's not going to happen.
Right. It's going to be 3840 and at only 24 frames per second.
Exactly. Now, that's not acceptable. So the HDMI group, and I went to the consortium meetings at CES, and they're now scratching their heads. They're not too sure, because in order to meet the specification that the industry needs for the providers to get content to that set, they have to redo the HDMI, and they're talking about HDMI 2.0. But they're having problems getting those specifications into 2.0. And they're scratching their heads, and it's become a bit of a controversy of whether they're going to be able to even do it or not. Now, we do have, sitting on the sidelines, it's been around for a very long time, is DisplayPort. DisplayPort is a transport that's nothing but just a great big pipe. And it's run on 3 wires, small wires. It was developed by a consortium of computer companies and a few of the CE companies. About 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I saw some demonstrations at IFA in Berlin when they first introduced it. And it's amazing. And there are so many different things you can do with it. Because it's nothing but a great big pipe, it is poised very easily to transport this 3840 by 2160 at 30 or 60 frames, whatever you like, down this pipe. And it works quite well. In fact, Thunderbolt is a form of DisplayPort. So it is working. It's very viable. It's been there for a long time. As I say, Thunderbolt is part of it.
And it's even free, right? It doesn't have a licensing fee like HDMI.
That is true, because it was put together by this consortium of manufacturers, and no one person owns it, so there is no licensing with it. And at CES and at this conference, we were talking about why it's not embraced, and the people in the panels were saying that HDMI is so prevalent with every piece of equipment. It has a structure that carries on from generation to generation, the physical construction, even though the plug falls out, but that's okay. What we have is a transport that's going to work, but the naysayers are talking about the excuse me, the fact that it doesn't do HDCP.
This you and I talked about this at CES, and I at that time said, well, I think HDMI, it's not going to replace HDMI because HDMI is so well entrenched. But then I learned that DisplayPort cannot support, or does not support at this point, HDCP copy protection. And that, to me, seems more reasonable reason why it's not being supported, because the studios don't want to let that content fly around without protection.
Well, HDMI has a dedicated line pair that does the two-way handshake for the HDCP.
Right.
And although DisplayPort is two-way, it's just a big pipe. There's no dedicated channel. They would have to restructure DisplayPort to do that. So then the question comes up, who's going to pay to do that? And right now, no one's stepping forward to say, oh, we're going to pay to make this work. And oh yeah, by the way, all you CE manufacturers, you have to put another connector on all your displays.
See, that's still an issue that I mentioned at CES when you and I were talking about it, and I still believe it is an important issue. Now, Undermined in the chat room says DisplayPort can do DRM since version 1.0. Is that true?
Yes, but it doesn't follow the data integrity that HDCP does.
Mm.
So there still has modifications have to be done, and there again, who's going to pay for it?
Right.
So that's an issue there. But the immediate thing is Sony. You buy the 85-inch Ultra HD, and they give you a little hard drive that has
a server, a media server computer that's dedicated to that. Yeah.
Right, and it's just a loaner. Has several movies on it with some trailers, and you can show that 4K Ultra HD off to all your friends and neighbors until everybody gets sick of looking at the same movie over and over and over again.
Right, right. Now, they did say that they would distribute new titles on Blu-ray data discs, and this is an important thing because on AVS Forum, for example, there's all kinds of discussion about, well, when's there going to be a 4K Blu-ray? And, well, you could do 4K on a BDXL, which is a recordable format, not a read-only format. And because that holds 100 or 128 gigabytes, so there should be enough room to hold a 4K movie at some reasonable compression. But there's no commercial stamped version of BDXL yet, and the Blu-ray Disc Association's probably working on a spec, but that's not going to be anytime real soon. So I don't think we can talk about physical media other than BD or Blu-ray data discs that Sony says they're going to deliver to you with your server, and you can load it into your server and then play it from the hard disk. Sony also at CES talked about distribution by downloading. And I tend to think if it's going to be anything, that's probably going to be the way it goes first.
Well, at the conference, when we discussed this, it was suggested that, let's see, you're going to spend 3 times downloading than the length of the movie. Consumers aren't really going to go for that.
Good point. Good point.
That's pretty not going to happen.
Yeah, Brandmaster in the chat room is saying, why not multiple Blu-ray discs? What, we can't change reels? Going back to reel changing.
Right. There is.
I don't know what the answer is. There is no easy answer, is there?
No, at this point there isn't. And you had brought up a point about the early days of HD. It really isn't the same because in the early days of HD, the ATSC, which is a whole other topic, maybe another show. Is working on ATSC 3.0, which is a whole new television standard. They're working on. They're going to start testing at the end of 14. So we're looking at a whole new receiver system. It's backwards compatible, but going forward, it will be new as well.
Will that have 4K in it?
Yes.
Or UHD?
Yes, they have UHD in it. They'll have provisions for mobile broadcasting. It was. If I could jump over here just for a second to
looking at your notes here. I know you probably took a ton of notes like I would have done at such a show. I would have filled up notebooks full of stuff, no doubt. Because this was early in the morning till late at night, just constant information overload for a week.
This was actually 12-hour days.
12-hour days. Yeah,
every
yikes.
Day. What they're want to do with this is to make it more programmable by the user. So the user's just not locked into this is what we broadcast and this is what you deal with. You'll have options with it and what size, what you're going to watch it on, a cell phone, a tablet. It's scalable. It has all of these quite good things that they're now starting to do the testing. But the ATSC is really into this, and they're doing quite well with it. So we look forward to that.
Yeah, that's going to be a couple of years down the pike, but we should see some interesting developments out of that. We don't have too much more time, and I'm not sure if we don't have enough time probably to talk about the last two things that I wanted to talk about, which were object-based sound design and mixing, such as Dolby Atmos, and the FCC reorganization of the wireless spectrum and what that means for the consumer.
Oh, yes.
But with only a couple minutes left, why don't you pick one, and we'll do that, and then we'll do the other one next time.
Let's go with object-based sound design.
Okay, very good.
Which was quite unique because The Hobbit was done for Atmos. It was on the Atmos system.
As was Life of Pi.
Yes, exactly. The audio mixers that were there, and there were some very prominent guys, they're embracing this. And I've gone to the Dolby Theater where they first showed the Atmos with their demo. And it was, well, kind of like, why? Well, in the theater, object-based, to explain to people, is that we're used to 7.1 or 7.2 with a surround sound, and you would hear a helicopter come from over the top of you. But now, with this object-based, they can take a flying bird twittering, and it can go up and down, around through the audience to follow what's going on the screen. So that sound is now programmable to, any point in the theater. So they can now not just have a helicopter fly over, but they can have a helicopter hover over your head and then just kind of go back over into a corner and stop and then go up. And you hear that going on that the surround sound doesn't do.
Right, right. It's the sound engineer is able to take each individual object that is emitting sound, such as a helicopter or a bird or whatever, and just with a joystick pan it around anywhere in a three-dimensional hemispherical space. And that's exactly what Dolby Atmos is. And so the general consensus at the conference was that this is a very good thing that's going to be used more and more in the future?
Oh, yes, everyone thought that the object-based audio is incredible, and it is definitely going to go forward with motion pictures. And they were trying to figure out they were offering suggestions on how to do it with television, but you can't get at 9.1 into the home.
Well, that is the other issue. Is doing it in the theater is one thing. Doing it at home is another, where you might have some familial objection to putting in more speakers, especially like overhead and right. 9.2 and 11.2 and whatever. But, there is hope that something like that might end up in the home at some point. Certainly Dolby Atmos might become a home thing. I know that DTS is working on something called multidimensional audio, MDA, which was developed originally sort of out of SRS, but then DTS acquired SRS. And both of those systems, I believe, are pretty scalable, so that the system goes out and says, okay, what resources do I have? How many speakers do I have? How many channels do I have? And then maps the object-oriented sound moving according to whatever the playback resources are, which I think is a very good idea.
Yeah, everyone thought at the conference that the object-based audio was very good, and it's definitely going to go forward. When you start talking more speakers and encoding, everybody gets a little nervous. But I think in this case, everyone thought that this was a major contribution to the artistic ability of the filmmakers.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely. And I go hear Dolby Atmos as often as I can. Unfortunately, there aren't very many theaters that have it yet. I'm hoping that more install the system so that more people can experience it and really hear what we're talking about, which I've heard, as you have, the effect of having things actually be pinpoint located around the room, and it's really quite astonishing.
Yeah, that I think lends to the artistic ability, as the helicopter example. In a war scene, you hear that helicopter coming, but you know where it's coming from. But right. To have something set over just right here and tweet in your ear as the character has 2 or 3 little birds floating around it just really does immerse you more into the story.
Yeah. So I'm really glad to hear that the technical professional community in Hollywood is really behind it, and I hope to see and hear more of it going forward.
Yes, it is. And, I thought, gee, Scott, what are we going to do for an hour on this show? But I've got so much material here.
Well, tell you, we'll have to have you come back. There's so much more to talk about, and you're always a great guest, and you have a lot of great things to say. So will you come back, and we'll continue this discussion another time? Absolutely.
And I can't say too much for the people at HPA for their generosity and as great a tech retreat as they put on every year. And they do such a good job of it.
Excellent. Well, we'll certainly have you back after next year's retreat, but certainly well before then, because there's so much to talk about, and you're way plugged into the industry. And I thank you so much for being here. That's Ron Williams. He's a consultant to the movie and TV industry. His company is Landmark Color, and you can find his company online at landmarkcolor.com. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it.
You bet. Now, you can find me on a number of places on the web at avsforum.com, where I'm the new editor. Also at hometheaterhifi.com. That's Secrets of Home Theater and High Fidelity, where I answer reader and listener questions and post a few other things here and there as well. You can email me at scott@twit.tv, and you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott. And you can also always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks at twit.tv/HTG or on its new YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/twithometheatergeeks. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be Chris Vernon, the founder of a company called Sontia in England. He's going to be talking to us from London, actually. And he's the creator of an audio enhancement technology called stable phase technology, which I heard at CES, and I was pretty impressed. So this is a very interesting and pretty geeky topic, so I do hope you will join me for that. Until then, geek out.